And we are back. Boxing with Mannix and Mora, post-Thanksgiving episode of the show. Sergio, you look like you had a few cervezas with your Thanksgiving dinner. How was your holiday?
Hey, listen, man. I'm glad to be spending my Native American Day here with you. I'm sure you have ancestors from the Plymouth Rock, and let's not go into that detail. But my holiday was great, man. I loved it. I had no tamales, but I had some fried turkey and all the fixings, good Cuban cigars, fine red wine, desserts. Beautiful. Loved it.
Just so people understand, every Thanksgiving, Sergio sends me some version of the same text that suggests that it was like my grandfather on Plymouth Rock that was sweeping his way through America, just wiping the Native Americans off the planet. It seems to be how you read this, Sergio.
Well, no, it's you're from Boston, Massachusetts, if I
Yes.
believe. That's where the Puritans landed, didn't they?
It's something like that.
And
Yes.
that's
It's
where you're from, Chris Mannix.
but
So
but,
you guys are
chron- but
you guys are spread,
chronologically,
you
your
guys are
time.
spreading your joy in religion amongst other things, and I remind you of it every year.
It's not what we were doing. All right. On this episode, we're going to get into a trainer change, or at least a trainer tweak, with Teofimo Lopez. We're also going to talk about a pretty radical idea from the former 112-pound champion, Sonny Edwards. And George Kambosos, who is very active on Twitter. I want to get your take on some of the things that George Kambosos has said lately. A little bit later, Sergio, I will be joined by Sonny Edwards. Got a chance to talk to him earlier in the day, going into a huge fight against Galal Yafai over in Birmingham, England on Saturday. That's a fight you can watch exclusively on DAZN. But Sergio, I got to start with the topic du jour. And this has been a topic that if you have been on social media over the last 72 hours, you will have had a lot of. Floyd Schofield, who is a undefeated prospect, 22 years old, top ranked in the 135-pound division, at least by one of the sanctioning bodies. He has been pushing hard for a fight against Shakur Stevenson. Both Schofield and his father, who has been more vocal and runs his social media channels, has been out there pushing for that fight. Shakur has engaged back. Oscar De La Hoya has weighed in. We'll get to that in a moment. Sergio, we discussed possible fights for Shakur Stevenson earlier in the week. We talked about Raymond Morataya, who is a worthy challenger. We talked about Joe Cordina, a former title holder at 130. We didn't mention Floyd Schofield. So what do you think of Floyd Schofield, Shakur Stevenson fight for February?
We didn't mention Floyd Schofield because he's just too young and too fresh. He's too green, ambitious, strong, talented, uh, fun to watch. He's carrying the main event position well. I mean, he's starting to become popular and put people in arenas. Everything's great. Why are you messing with your pride now? Floyd Schofield had successful sparring sessions with Shakur Stevenson, according to him. That's what Team Schofield says. That's great, man. But sparring and the professional level, especially on the championship level, against a multi-division champion in Shakur and Olympic silver silver medalist in Shakur, it's just too much. I just think he should check his pride at the door, at the gym door, and leave the sparring sessions and those glory, those stories of glory in sparring where they belong, in the gym. That's what happens whenever you give these young bucks an opportunity at the champ in sparring. It happens all the time. It happened with me. They take those glory sparring sessions and they spread them around everywhere. That's the reason, and it only got worse with social media. At least with me, social media was antique, if I didn't exist. But nowadays, you get a clip, you post it, it goes viral. All the fans and all the critics talk about it, and they start saying, "Oh, he can beat him. He had a great day in sparring." Sparring is where you prepare for things that you never tried. It's where you're coming into camp out of shape. You're not in your best shape. You're a lot of things can go wrong in one day, maybe even 2 days of sparring, but it's not the real thing. So look, just to put a button in this, Chris Mannix, I think it's too early for Floyd Schofield to be talking about a guy like Shakur. Shakur's a beast. He should be pointing and targeting champions. Schofield should be targeting former champions.
Yeah, I was going to drill down on the sparring part of it because you're right. The confidence that Floyd and his father are brimming with, it all comes from these sparring sessions that Floyd had with Shakur Stevenson that he had with Devin Haney. And I agree with you. I think they're vastly overrating the significance of it. I mean, you said it. I've heard, a great fighter like Andre Ward say it in the past. Like, you're not supposed to go into sparring looking to put on a dominant performance. You're supposed to go into sparring working on stuff, right? Like, so if you have a game plan for, say, like a Vernon Forrest or a Daniel Jacobs or whatever, like you're trying to work on things that are going to beat them. Similarly, like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the sparring partners you're bringing in are supposed to be helping you in that respect. Like, they're supposed to be emulating the fighters that you're going to face. I mean, we talk about this in fighter meetings all the time. Like, who'd you get for sparring? Were they able to reasonably, facsimilate the opponent you got in front of you? Like, it's not a fight. It's not. So you're basing your ability to succeed against a championship level fighter like Shakur Stevenson on a couple dozen rounds of sparring or less against him. To me, that's really foolish, or a foolish approach to take.
Did you say facsimile? Leave that
facsimile.
Terminology for the office, Chris Mannix. No,
reasonable.
You try to imitate. You try to impersonate. You try to do what your opponent's going to do. That's what you pay your sparring partners for. But yeah, and you do that with word of mouth. Hey, do you know a guy that spars like so-and-so? Do you know a guy with power? Do you know a tall guy? Do you know a short guy that's stocky? It's word of mouth. And there's a network in sparring where you can tell, ask one coach, that coach asks two coach, and it just spreads out. Next thing you know, you have the perfect sparring partner. And once you have one sparring partner, then you got to get a younger guy just to give you work, just to give you punches. And then you trade them around. Then if you're really in shape, once you start getting into shape, because you don't want the first guy to, take it all of you. The second guy beats you up. Then you go through 3 sparring partners, and then you alternate them. There's bound to be a point in those rounds where you have one bad round and a new kid that's ambitious and young had one good moment against you. And then that's going to be your tale of glory for the next, couple of years. That's what happens when a professional champion on the championship level is preparing for a fight. We give these kids opportunities to come at the champ. Come at me as hard as you can. I used to pay my sparring partners extra if they had good rounds against me. Every good round they had, I paid them extra. I would want them to try to take my head off. They never did, but I paid them to. Sometimes they had good sparring sessions, and guess what? I heard those glory tales. Oh, I did good against Sergio Mora. Man, when I would hear those rumblings, I would call them back when I was in shape and beat the shit out of them. That's what you do, and then teach them a lesson. That way they don't go and spread those rumors. Floyd Schofield needs to understand that in this game, it's going to be about his reputation, because if he's spreading rumors, things like that, people aren't going to trust him in the camp and gym anymore. That's one. And two, relax, man. You got you're filling out the main event nicely. You're putting up entertaining fights, but you've also looked vulnerable in those fights. So now check that ego and realize you have a lot to learn and a lot to gain out of just being patient.
Yeah, I mentioned Oscar De La Hoya, and on Thursday, he was on social media effectively saying the same things that we are, that it's too soon. Floyd Schofield is 22. He's only had one 12-round fight. That was his last fight against Rene Guiron. Won that fight by convincing decision, but didn't look dominant in it. In fact, Oscar graded that performance a C. I think Floyd himself, after the fight, said C, C+. I thought it was right in that range as well. He got hurt in that fight, Sergio, by Guiron. And if you're getting hurt by guys on the level of Rene Guiron, no disrespect to him, you're not ready for a Shakur Stevenson. You mentioned at the top, like, he should be fighting former champions. That is the next step in his development. Guys that have held the belt for X number of months or years, who are a little bit older, who've got some experience, who can show him some of the tricks that he's likely to see when he takes his game to the next level. You and I are both fans of Floyd Schofield. We think there's a lot of potential for him to get to that superstar level. And if he has the talent to back up all the talk, he could be a big name in boxing very quickly, but it's way too soon. It is way too soon. And if I'm Oscar De La Hoya, I'm Eric Gomez, I am standing in front of this particular fight, because while I don't think this is a fight that Floyd could get hurt in, I think it's a fight he could get embarrassed in, right? Like, I think Shakur is levels above him right now. And maybe though that gap closes in the next couple of years, Maybe we're talking about Schofield against Shakur in a big fight in like 2026. But right now, to me, it's a mismatch. And again, I respect young fighters for wanting that smoke. I respect young fighters for wanting to go for those big fights. But this to me is a bridge too far. And if I'm De La Hoya, I'm holding my ground and say, look, we're going to get you 2 or 3 fights in 2025, and maybe start of 2026, when you get those rounds under your belt, when you get that experience under your belt, maybe then we'll start talking about you and Shakur Stevenson.
Yeah, no, you said it right. And the thing, Mannix, is that you want young fighters to talk like this. You want them to think they can beat everybody. You want them to have that way of thinking. You don't want them to be too careful and start thinking like a matchmaker and maneuvering their way to the top. No, you want to be the best. You want to fight the best. That's what you want to have in them as far as what they feel. But you also got to mold that. It takes a team, man. It takes a father. It takes a trainer's voice. It takes a manager. It takes a matchmaker. It takes a promoter. It takes a lot of people to get in this guy's ear and give him their piece of advice, right? Everyone says, hey, what's a rush? You choose the right words for you won't offend them, because fighters are all their egos are small. All right, I'm just telling you right now. We have sensitive egos, man. Don't be talking about what we can't do, because we spent our entire life, proving people wrong. So why not one more time? But this time, when it comes to your career, when it comes to you got to this point, this level of success, now it's time to tread lightly, man. I know it sounds the opposite of what you've been doing your entire life. And Floyd Schofield has an incredible story from, being homeless, and him and his father. So who the fuck can tell him, no, not yet, after everything he's come faced and came back from. But you only have one career, and one bad loss can set you back. Why the hell are you going for calling out one of the trickiest undefeated, multi-division Olympic medalist in Shakur? It's suicide. It's career suicide to be doing that. You climb the ranks, you put some money in your pocket, you spread your name around, and that's what you got to do. And his father and trainer and everyone around him should tell him that and urge him to do that as well.
Yeah, it's like I said, we're not talking about never doing this. We're talking about getting 2 or 3 fights in 2025 and then jumping into it when he's 23 years old and still very young.
23, yeah, 23.
Still very, very young in this boxing game. And look, it's not like we're not just saying this that he needs to get more experience because just getting experience matters. Of course it does. But we've called this fight. There are things he's got to clean up. Like he stopped lunging quite as much in his last fight, but that's something that's been a problem for him. And I think he's got to learn and continue to learn what to do when you've got an opponent in front of you that can't be knocked out. And I'm sure he learned some valuable lessons in that last fight against Giron, but he was a little too over-aggressive in those final couple of rounds. I mean, how many rounds, Sergio, did he go back into the corner and have his father and Ronnie Shields tell him he's not doing it right? So there's definitely things he's got to get better at before he's ready to take the jump to that next level. All right, speaking of trainers, we have a trainer tweak going on in the camp of Teofimo Lopez. Teofimo Lopez, who has been long trained, forever trained by his father, Teofimo Sr. He is going to be adding Eddy Reynoso, part of Team Canelo, the leader of Team Canelo, to that camp. Not a real surprise, because in the last few months, we've seen video of Teofimo Lopez up at Canelo's camp doing some work with Canelo. But now it is official. Eddy Reynoso will be part of Team Lopez there. What do you think of this addition to Teofimo's camp?
It was a matter of time. I mean, I'm not going to go into the whole father-son trainer relationship thing that I don't like in boxing, but that was one of these examples where Teofimo Jr. needed to move on from Senior. And not saying that you need to replace him and not see his face again, just not make him the main voice. He needs somebody at this point of his career and this point of his manhood. Those are two different things, man. My trainer used to tell me, whenever you have a father, training his son, he never lets him become a man. Part of being a fighter is finding yourself as a man, because you've been boxing since you were a kid. So you can't talk to a man like you were talking to an 8-year-old kid. That's what happens. Fathers don't change the way they speak to their sons. So Teofimo Sr. needed to take a step back. If he loves his son, he needs to take a step back and learn how to shut up, because for many reasons. And I think training alongside greatness, alongside Eddy Reynoso, who has the roadmap to greatness. I'm not saying Eddy Reynoso is Angelo Dundee. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying he traveled the road of greatness and knows how to get back there. And Teofimo has that it factor, all right? He has the speed, the power, the agility, the strength, the experience now. And I think he has the hunger. The only thing missing was this, and maybe I never questioned his conditioning as far as him being in shape. Other things I questioned, like going outside of the ring, his issues he was dealing outside the ring. All right, now if you're in a professional camp like Canelo's, none of that's going to penetrate the gym. It's going to be Monday through Saturday, 100% training, and it's going to be 100% concentrating on your fight. That's the reason guys like Ryan Garcia, who has so many, fingers on so many buttons, couldn't handle it. Because when you're dealing with a professional camp, a championship camp, they're not going to allow you with those shenanigans. They're not going to allow you bringing people and videotape and social media and all that bullshit. No, it's camp every fucking day. Today we're working on this. Today we're working on that. Today we're doing this, sparring 3 times a week. Now we're going to switch it up on you. They're going to be kicking your ass every other day, and you're going to like it. Every day you're going to be learning something new. So I think it's a perfect thing for Teofimo Jr. to go with Eddy Reynoso, who has already been there, done that, and could teach him a lot.
Yeah, I love it too. I think the more minds you can add to your corner when you're at the level that Teofimo is at, I think is a good thing. Look, his father has faced a lot of criticism the last couple of years for some of the struggles with Teofimo. He is also, the architect, or was the architect, of a game plan that beat Vasily Lomachenko and beat Josh Taylor. So he deserves some credit for that as well. But adding a voice like Eddy Reynoso, who is only going to bring real institutional knowledge to that corner. We have to see how it works, right? Like sometimes you bring in an outside trainer and dad still wants all the control. Sometimes it doesn't work. So we can't say it's an absolute masterstroke yet until we see it. But on paper, I really like the addition of Teofimo. And I think he needs... Right,
and one more thing, Mannix, one more thing that I think was lost in translation with Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia doesn't speak Spanish that well. And, Eddy Reynoso, all his instructions are going to be in Spanish. Teofimo speaks Spanish. So there's not going to be no barrier with languages. So that's another thing. Eddy Reynoso could just speak like he's talking to Canelo. And I'm sure there's not going to be any problems understanding him. I think Ryan Garcia had issues not only with him not being number one, which is ridiculous because Canelo's in the same gym, and not having all his attention. But 2, I also think the language barrier was a problem. That's not going to be an issue with Teofimo Jr.
Could have been. I don't know that Ryan had an issue with not being number one. I don't think that was...
He told us. He said he didn't have time for me like he should have. And we criticized him for that because we said, well, he shouldn't have the time for you because he has his number one guy there.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right about that. He went to Joe Goostin, and Joe Goostin was largely, focused on Ryan Garcia. You're right about that. The one thing I like about this union with the Lopez's and Eddy Reynoso, there's a clear style that Teofimo struggles with, and that's movers, right? Like Sandor Martin gave Teofimo fits. Jermaine Ortiz gave Teofimo fits. One thing we've seen Canelo do really well is cut the ring off and deal with movers. He doesn't like doing it. He likes it when guys engage with him. But, some of the guys that have moved around against him, whether it's Billy Joe Saunders or Jermell Charlo, they have not succeeded. They have either been knocked out or they have been blown out. So I think that's an element that Eddy Reynoso can drill down on right away. Like when Teofimo has a fighter that wants to engage, whether it's Lomachenko, Josh Taylor, any of these high-level guys that have wanted to fight with him, he's succeeded really well. The Lomachenko fight was the best performance of his pro career. Remember, Josh Taylor's taken a step back in the last year, but at that time, he was undefeated and really the unquestioned king of 140 pounds. Like, he had lost some of his belts because of the politics of it, but he was the guy at 140, and Teofimo beat him clean. So when you have guys that come at you, Teofimo is pretty good. Where he really struggles is with those guys that try to box and move. And I think Eddy Reynoso can add something to that. Like what we've seen from Canelo most notably, but guys like Ryan Garcia, guys like Oscar Valdez, this is something that can be imparted on Teofimo Lopez, and I think he's going to have some success on that end. What do you think of that?
I don't know what imparted means, but I can tell you
Put
that.
on, given to.
Well, then say given to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he learned that on the job because Canelo, if you remember 10 years ago, they were struggling with movers as well. Eddy Reynoso and Canelo was struggling with guys with like Austin Trout and Eddie's Landy Lara, but they learned on the job. They learned from their mistakes. And that's the reason they became pound for pound number one because they learned how to make that ring smaller and smaller and use their professional experience because it wasn't going to be footwork. Canelo wasn't going to pick up foot speed all of a sudden. He's a flat-footed fighter when it comes to the legs down. He doesn't do that much running and cardio and all that. He does swimming and all, amongst other things, because of joints and bad knees or whatever it is. But they learned how to fight like an old bull, and they mastered that. They make that 20-foot ring seem smaller and smaller and smaller because they know how to cut it in half. They know how to break down an opponent when he's going to the right. You throw a right punch to stop him from going that way, but that's not the hard punch. The hard punch is the left one because he's going to be going that way. It's X's and O's that you have to do that, and they can learn that because Teofimo has the intelligence and he has a great footwork. He has foot speed. That's something Canelo doesn't have. Teofimo has agility, he has foot speed, he has explosiveness from the lower body. Think of like a linebacker or a fullback. That's Teofimo Lopez. Canelo didn't have that. So Eddy Reynoso actually has more to mold, with such a young fighter, just like he did with Canelo. But with Canelo, he was earning his stripes, Eddy Reynoso. He was learning on the job, like I said. Now he's up top of the hill. He can help these young guys because he's been there, done that.
Yeah, I agree with that. So it is now, Sergio, the week of the 3-year anniversary of one of the bigger upsets we've seen in the last 20 years, and that was George Kambosos outpointing Teofimo Lopez in New York. We were on that fight along with Todd Grisham on the call. And since then, it has been a bit of a struggle for Kambosos. He has lost 3 of his last 4 fights. His 3 losses have all come at a high level, 2 to Devin Haney and 1 to Vasily Lomachenko. Teofimo went on social media and said that his team made an offer to Kambosos for the rematch. He said it was around $2.5 million plus some pay-per-view upside on that. Kambosos fired back on social media, and he said effectively that Teofimo is fugazi. He said Teofimo knows nothing about money, about pay-per-views, about selling tickets. He says Teofimo fights in wedding ballrooms these days. You don't know if you're coming or going. And that started a whole Twitter backlash that got pretty nasty and pretty personal between the two of these guys. My question for you, Sergio, is this. Yes, that was a great night, a great upset for George Kambosos. But does George Kambosos have the right to be downplaying Teofimo at this stage? It's been 3 years since their last fight. Teofimo has moved up and beaten the top guy at 140 and won a world title. George Kambosos hasn't done much of anything. Does he have the right to keep chirping like this on social media?
First of all, Chris Mannix, you know what fugazi means and where it came from?
Yes, I do.
Explain
It's
yourself.
it's a mobster phrase. Fugazi, fake.
Donnie Brasco and his fake
Yes.
diamonds. It's a
Yes.
it's a false shine. It's a
Yes.
false shine. Okay, yes. So yes, I agree with Cambosis on this one because if you beat the man, you become the man. That's just simple. It's very simple. And he did it on the big stage where Cambosis had to travel across the world to do it in the backyard of Teofimo Lopez, the bully in New York, in Madison Square Garden, smaller theater, but it was still in the presence of greatness. Teofimo had everybody there from his borough. So that's how you become the man. You beat the bully on his own terms, on his own territory. All right. So Kambosos has that right. Even though it was that one special night, if it was one night and then he came up short against the other champions you were talking about, and Haney and Loma, Loma is great. Hall of Fame great. No shame losing on that one. Haney was just on a different level at that period. It was hard to get past that jab. And stylistically, Kambosos had no answer for it. No shame in those losses, but you still have that one loss, that one win against Teofimo. So guess what? He's the Huckleberry. Kambosos is Teofimo's Huckleberry until Teofimo could come back and take his respect back. Other than that, I love the fact that Kambosos is dangling that win over him. He's dangling that win, saying, "Hey, man, you can talk all the talk. You can be the best at 140. You can get all the accolades. But look, I still got this win over you, baby. Come get it when you want." I love it, man. That's part of boxing.
So I preface this by saying I have enormous respect for what George Kambosos accomplished that night in 2021. I also have enormous respect for the fact that Kambosos, in his first fight since winning all those belts, after winning all those belts, took on a very tough and not the most marketable guy necessarily in Devin Haney. Now, he got paid a ton of money to do it, right? The 2-fight deal in Australia, I mean, he probably made like $10 million off of those fights. So he was well compensated for fighting Devin Haney. But you and I both know he could have taken a much easier fight in Australia, a victory lap type of fight, and then gone on to fight a Devin Haney. He didn't. He wanted to fight the best, and he's shown that, during this brief time that he's been on top. But the reality is, Sergio, he's not winning fights, right? And he's not even close. Like Devin Haney in those 2 fights, wide wins. Lomachenko beat him soundly. Even the Maxie Hughes win, Sergio, that was debatable, right? Like Hughes' team, they'll argue pretty vigorously that they won that fight. Kambosos came out on top, got the fight with Lomachenko, got stopped against Lomachenko. So my problem now with Kambosos is that he's just shoving in people's faces his one win, right? And since then, he can't win. And Teofimo, since that loss, has done more than Kambosos. He's gone on to beat some credible guys, some questionable wins in between, like the Sandor Martin win was certainly questionable. The Jermaine Ortiz win was tough to watch. But beating Josh Taylor is real. Beating Josh Taylor is a great win. That is better than any win that Kambosos has had since then. To me, George is starting to fall into this trap of thinking he's this big deal because he sold some tickets in Australia, right? And look, to his credit and to his team's credit, they have capitalized on that one win better than any fighter I've ever seen ever capitalize on one win. We kind of know the score with Kambosos signing with Matchroom. Matchroom is crossing their fingers and hoping that Liam Paro wins this fight against Richardson Hitchens so they can make Paro versus Kambosos at 140 in Australia. Big event, domestic rivalry. Let me say this right now. Kambosos would and should be a huge underdog against Liam Paro. Kambosos is moving up to 140. How does he even make, he's going to have to eat his way up there. Kambosos, a more strategic move, probably would have been going down to 130, right? He's a small guy. He's slight of frame. At 140, Sergio, he is going to be physically smaller than whoever he faces, including Liam Paro. To the point where, the plan is to get George Kambosos a win in the first quarter of 2025. You got to be real damn careful with who you match him up with at 140 because that's a weight class that physically he might not be ready for. So I'm getting, I've kind of done a 180 here on Kambosos where I was like, wow, look what this guy did on a night that even members of his own team were doubting him. Were thinking he wasn't going to win that fight against Teofimo. He did. He shocked the world. But since then, he's done diddly. And you got to own that. You can't be smacking down Teofimo, who's got a far better resume than you. Yeah, you got the best of him on one night, but he has a far better resume than Kambosos. If you want to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. And in the last 3 years, Kambosos has not walked the walk.
One night could change your life. One fight can literally make you a rich man. Andy Ruiz is the perfect example for that. And he ended up making tens of millions of dollars off that one win. Kambosos is in the same boat. And there's many examples of this throughout the boxing history. The fact where you get an unknown, beat the man and nobody knew he can do. And then all of a sudden he made a name for himself. And not only can he get a rematch with him, but then all of a sudden he can branch out and fight other champions and other up and comers. And he's going to make a career out of that because that's just the way the sport is, man. Whenever you beat the odds, especially the higher the odds, the higher the odds, that's when whoa, he was able to have that one special night. And you think you can actually reinvent that night over and over. And most of the time you can't. You're just magical that one night, but that one magic's going to be enough for you to actually make a career out of it. George Kambosos had made a boatload of money. For this kid, that was a road warrior going in people's backyards, going all over the world just to get these fights and these wins. Now he earned it. He earned going all the way down in Australia and make all that money against Haney. Even though he came up short, he still made a boatload of money. And now it's time for him to have a second win against these other fighters. And he's always going to have that Teofimo win. No matter what happens in his career from now on, he's going to have that one magical moment on his box rec where he beat the man, undefeated, took his zero. And that right there is prideful. for a guy like
You
Teofimo.
will, but Sergio,
He wants that back.
you can't. Yes, you'll always have that, but it gets exhausting when you keep clobbering people over the head with it.
No,
Like,
it does. No, it does, and that's where George Kambosos needs to realize he's being annoying. Do your talking inside the ring. So he has to balance. He has to balance his goading and being a troll with being a true professional like he was before all that. Because I love Kambosos. I love the way he talked, carried himself, the way he fought. He was a real deal. He's becoming a little bit too much of a troll with them Twitter fingers too. So I think he should do all his talking in the ring. I agree
and
with you a little bit there.
it's not. Look, and again, we're picking on Kambosos here, but he's kind of egging people on to do it because he keeps getting on social media and blasting guys and using his ticket sales in Australia as the reason he's able to do it. Like, the first fight with Haney was not competitive. The second fight against Haney was even less competitive. The fight against Lomachenko was not remotely competitive. So, like, eventually you got to back it up with performances, right? You got to back it up with a big win in the ring. And he has not achieved that, whereas Teofimo has. He has. So, I don't know, you're smiling there. I don't know if you had something more to add to that, but that's
Well, because I'm
weird.
pretty sure George Kambosos is tweeting this from his mansion with all his belts on display, sending out messages to the world, living the life of a man,
That's
living
great, but
the life
Sergio,
as the man. So
Sergio,
yeah, man, of course, they
we
say
are
there's a saying my trainer used to tell me. I think it was a Eddie Van Halen quote. They say money can't buy happiness, but it could sure buy you a big yacht to sail alongside it. That's George Kambosos in Australia.
and absolutely, and it's good. And look, the money's not done coming in. Like, if he can get that Paro fight, that's a pile of money. And then the Teofimo fight is still always going to be out there, right? That's still going to be an option for him down the line. Maybe it won't be as lucrative if he keeps losing, but it's still going to be an option. I honestly, I think George Kambosos. Last week we did our Sergio Mora Mount Rushmore of bad business decisions. The reverse of that is Kambosos, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
he and his team have made some brilliant business decisions, made himself an enormous fortune where he would have been had he lost that Lopez fight by decision versus where he is now is probably ultimately going to wind up being like $20 million. And that's crazy. That is crazy. He has capitalized more, I'll say it again, off one win, perhaps more than any fighter in boxing history. But right now, like, every time I log on Twitter and I see Kambosos and Lopez going at it, and I see stuff about ticket sales and pay-per-views and things like that, it's like, oh, God, just stop. That's not what boxing is about. Like, you can talk the talk, but you've got to eventually win some of these fights. That's kind of where I stand on that. All right, last thing for you. We mentioned Sonny Edwards, who's going to be joining me on the show next. Earlier in the week, he had some comments that caught my eye where he's talking about PED use in boxing. Now, Sonny says he has been tested year-round, tested all the time for a very long time. He's been a strong advocate for drug testing in boxing, but he sees kind of what we see, Sergio, where it's like, hey, sometimes there is vigorous testing done for some fights. Sometimes, as we saw with the Tevin Farmer fight against William Zepeda, testing doesn't really exist. So Sonny's solution, if you want to call it that, is that PEDs should be allowed in boxing. There should be no testing for PEDs in boxing. Now, I'm not entirely sure if he was being completely serious on this, but he did put that out there in the universe. Sergio, you are the former champion. What do you say to the idea of no testing whatsoever in boxing?
I think it's Sonny Edwards being Sonny. We got to actually chop it up with him and talk to him and share rides with him when we're wherever we were. I think
Orlando.
doing a fight. Yeah, it was in Arizona, and
nope,
we got
Orlando.
to pick.
That's in Florida.
Oh, wherever it was, Chris Mannix, we got to pick his brain. And Sonny is a character, man. He's nonstop. He carries 95% of the fighter meetings, 95% of the conversation inside the car. This man is nonstop jibber jabber. Now, most of it, you just got to take it for what it is with a grain of salt. It's Sonny being Sonny. All right. I hope he's not being serious here because it would just be the wild, wild, wild west in boxing if everyone's taking PEDs. That's a ridiculous idea because if someone God forbid, gets seriously hurt or damaged or even killed, then the sport ends because then, whatever. Sonny Edwards, I just think he was maybe saying something along the lines where, yes, these 24/7 PED, tests where they just pop up in your gym, they pop up at your house. They can be a nuisance. They can be inconvenient, and they're very expensive. So to continue doing this, I understand why it's so hard for every big fight or every mega big fight, any fight on the championship level to get tested. It just costs too much money, and it's too many moving pieces for promoters to do, for the sanctioning bodies, for the commission. I get it. Out of all my professional fights, Mannix, 37. I think I've only got drug tested. I mean, I got drug tested for all of them, but where I only had that VADA strict one for one, and that was against Shane Mosley, where they followed me and they surprised me and they ambushed me at the gym. One time, man. That's one time. Now I wasn't a drug cheat. I didn't do none of that stuff, but and my power ratio would definitely clarify me there and vindicate me there. But one time because it was just too expensive, way too expensive. When they told me how much it was, I was like, whoa, they're out of testing. And then I started thinking, man, they're taking that out of my check. Yeah, no wonder. So yeah, Sonny Edwards has a point there. But to make it like the purge of PEDs, where that one night you could just inject everything that you want and fight, that's ridiculous, man. No, that's stupid.
No, because it is with 100% certainty I say that if you allow that type of recklessness, someone will die. And I've said this before, Sergio, like you and I sit here and argue about the need for year-round testing, stringent testing, the kind of testing that takes place in other major sports. If it turns out, in the next weeks, months, years, that someone is killed in the ring by a fighter that afterwards tests positive for a banned substance, then boxing is screwed. Because then that's the kind of catnip that gets mainstream media outlets involved, that puts you on Fox News and MSNBC and CNN and gets you into the New York Times. Like that's the kind, and gets Congress talking about whether or not boxing should be legal. Like that, as sure as I'm sitting here, it's going to happen. Like we've had some awful, awful incidents in the ring. Fortunately, or not, fortunately might be the wrong word, but it has not involved a performance-enhancing drug. But the second it happens, all hell is going to break loose in boxing. And I just want to see boxing get ahead of that. You're completely right. The cost is prohibitive, right? The cost is a problem in all this. They've got to find a way to do effective, efficient testing at a reasonable cost to the fighter, to the promoter, to the commission. In fact, everyone should share the burden. It shouldn't just come out of the pocket of the fighter or the promoter or the commission.
There you go.
It should be a little bit from everybody, but it needs to happen year round. Like a quick early solution to me should be, you should not be allowed to fight for a major championship unless you were enrolled in VADA testing up to 8 weeks before that fight, or whatever VADA decides is the appropriate time. Like that's not a solution to the overall problem, but to me, that's a good start. No championship belt if you can't pass VADA testing before the fight. And then you kind of build from there, because otherwise we're headed towards a dark day, man. I'm telling you, we are headed towards a really dark day where some guy winds up dead or with brain damage, and the guy that does it to him is going to wind up testing positive for a banned substance.
Yeah, I can deal with the inconsistencies in VADA and drug testings, but I can't deal with and I could deal with the inconvenience of it too, because they just pop up at your gym and all that. But it's inconsistent. It's inconvenient. It's inconsistent. And if someone dies, then it's going to be, it's going to be something where everyone gets blamed, and yeah, boxing's done and kaput. So it's something where you really have to nip it in the bud. It's a tricky thing, man. You're not gonna be able to catch every cheat, and there's a lot of cheaters fighting right now. So it's a slippery slope, man. Even if you do catch them, sometimes you catch them too late after the win, and then they still got the win, they still got the money. So yeah, it's one of these things where it's gonna be a long hill to climb.
When that VADA tester showed up at your gym before the Mosley fight, did they see your punch and then they go, nah, we're good. We're good.
They looked at my punch knockout ratio and say, oh, well, we're going to save $10,000 here. We don't, on to the next guy. Yeah, no, it's true. I never even thought of cheating. I never crossed my mind. I look at the fact that I never wasn't knocking out and hurting guys. I never wanted to win in a crooked manner.
But
so I have honor, Chris Mannix.
I know. I've always said that about you, and I know we've talked in the past and we don't have to get into too much detail here, but we've talked about some of the people that have approached you in the past and kind of
Yeah.
offered some special magic elixir. Can't
Mhm.
tell you what's in it, but offered some special sauce. Like, and like you said, you've turned
He
that
was a
down.
chemist. He said he was a
Yeah,
chemist. As soon
yeah,
as
yeah. They're all
I heard that
chemists.
quote unquote, I'm a chemist. I'm like, I'm out of here. I don't
They're
want to
all
deal with no chemist
they're
because
all they're all
that's when you deal with issues. So yeah, man, just multivitamins and protein shakes, baby, for my entire career.
yes. And the power numbers reflect that.